Hello everyone, this is Sedworth, just showing you some more of my Bitwig tricks. Though this particular video is not going to be about building devices or anything crazy, it's mostly answering some frequently asked questions I see regarding various features in Bitwig that may not be apparent immediately to people, and just some hidden, what I think of as quality of life things that I think will help people out. Anyway, let's get started. First thing I'm going to show is quantize recording. If you're not sure what that is, it just means that when you record some MIDI in, it will quantize to whatever you have it set to, whether that be 8th notes, 16th notes, whatever. A lot of people don't know about this little button here directly to the right, or they don't notice this little button directly to the right of the automation recording. And in here, you can quantize note length, record the quantization. I believe it's off by default, and 16th is usually pretty good. And you can also quantize the length so that the length of the note will always snap to the closest 16th note, as opposed to just wherever it may be. Also in the screen, you can decide how long you want your pre-roll before you start recording, and if you want the metronome playing at that point, and also what type of automation you want. If you're not sure what the different types of automation are, there's a little description here over these when you click on them, and it seems to be pretty clear, really. So anyway, that's quantize recording button. Next thing I want to talk about is renaming device panel mappings. A lot of times when you want to make custom maps for your controller, you'll get something like this. You want to make a new page, it's called default. So I'm going to call up Massive here, and we're going to assign some stuff. When you actually click a control on your VST, it goes to the top of this list here, so it makes it easier to assign. So let's just say this is going to be this. And I want these as a controller. And let's say I want another set of controls. I'm just going to drag whatever. Okay, so I have these two. I'm switching between them on my keyboard. If you don't have a keyboard that has a script that allows you to do stuff like this, then this may not be very helpful. But on my Novation, I can switch between those two different maps. The problem is they're both called default. That is not helpful. So you can rename these just by Alt, Control, click. We'll just call this one. And the other one, I'm going to call Chipotle, because I want a burrito. Yeah, that's how you rename those. So you could potentially have everything on here, at least everything that works. There's a few things that you can't assign, but you can have everything on here assigned to your MIDI controller and be able to switch between your maps with whatever your control does to switch between maps. Mine, you hit the drum pads to do it. So that's renaming panel mappings. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to talk about is MIDI sync. What that means is having the clock within Bitwig synced up to a piece of software that's not running in Bitwig or an external controller. For this, I'm going to be using Reactor Standalone just for an example. And here it is. You go into your preferences, controllers here, add manually, generic MIDI clock transmitter. The thing you want to transmit the clock to should show up in this list if it's installed correctly. For this, I'm using Reactor. And I also want to get MIDI back in from Reactor. So for this, I'm going to just use a generic MIDI keyboard. It doesn't matter. We're going to use Reactor for that. So now I got Reactor Standalone loaded up, and I have this spiral sequencer. And I want to play this awesome Reactor, or awesome massive patch that is the default, and it sounds like this with that sequencer. So what I got to do, go to the routing. All instruments will do it. If you want to get more specific, you can just pick this generic MIDI keyboard that we added a second ago. For some reason it didn't add it there. Okay, so now when you hit play, these should be synced up with Reactor, and we should be getting something from that sequencer. There it is. Spiral's kind of weird, so sometimes it takes some work to get something useful out of it. And you can actually record this MIDI like this too. However, sometimes it's a little bit out of sync and you may have to move it around and mess with your delay settings and things like that in here. But for this, mine, it recorded exactly the way I wanted it to. So, and that is MIDI sync. One of the most useful things that I think is underutilized by people is the middle mouse drag. It is one of my favorite things about Bitwig. It makes navigation way easier than trying to zoom around with this or use these bars, not this bar, but like this over here. I don't even barely know how to do it because I never do it that way. I always just click where I want, middle drag, zoom in, zoom out, move left, right, real quick, real easy. And once you get used to doing that, it's actually really hard to go to other software where you can't do that. At least for me it is. It'll change your life, middle mouse drag. Another thing I say on forums a lot is piano roll preview. So what we're going to do here is look at this little button I'm clicking right here. I think by default it's off, but if you click it on, it'll now preview whatever you're playing. Another thing about the piano roll that I think is underutilized is the difference between the piano roll and what they call drum editing. This basically opens up only named notes or notes that you have used. So for this example, I just have these 5. One thing I like to do is to just draw out the entire scale I plan on using, or, you know, whatever notes I think I'm going to use in the song. And then you can just, if you don't want this crazy chord at the beginning, you can just mute that. Now you have this scale here. If you want to use this spot, you're going to have to erase one of these muted ones. But, you know, anything I draw in here is in key. You know, it's not the prettiest thing, but it's at least in key. So anyway, I think that's something that's underutilized and very useful. Okay, the next thing I'm going to talk about is the alt drag in of samples. Basically, let's say for some reason you want 8 kick drums. You could, if you just drag them in like this, they'll each be their own track, and then you'll have to mess around and get them wherever you want them. But if you hit alt when you drag, they're now on the same track in sequence. So if you want them on the same track, you got the start right there, and you don't have to worry about trying to consolidate them after you've already dragged them onto their own tracks. Another use for alt drag is with the sampler, specifically multi-samples that have the name of the note in the multi-sample, or in the sample. So we're going to create a new multi-sample, and I'll show you what I mean. Like within these samples, I believe some of these have the names of the notes in them. Yeah, right here. See how over here it's got E1, C2. Bitwig's sampler is smart enough to know that means those should go in these spots. However, sometimes you don't want them there. And if that's the case, you hit Alt to just make it drag in like normal. But yeah, without Alt, you can't not put it in the spot that's in the name. One last tip on here is something that I see quite often is people not knowing how to do sidechain in Bitwig for VSTs that have it. For instance, this solid bus compressor, Native Instruments, has one. And it's not obvious how to get to the sidechain. It's right here. If it's got one that registers with Bitwig, it'll be right here. You just push the button. You pick which track you want to get the sidechain from, and then it'll work. However, there's a few that really should have sidechains that don't show up. Isotopes Alloy is the one that sticks out. There was a kind of a talk on the KVR forums about that for a bit, where a few of us tried to get it to work and just couldn't. So, like I said, the sidechain button's here. It doesn't always show up when you think it maybe should. One last tip has to do with these tools up here. A lot of you probably know this one, but I'm sure there's some that don't. You switch your tools with your 1 through 5. A lot of people know that. But if you just leave it down for the time that you need it and then let go, it'll go back to the last one. So let's say I want, like right here, I draw a clip, but but I just leave it down. I don't have to switch to the pen or the pencil and then back to the pointer. You know, if I say want to erase this, erase parts of this with the eraser, just leave it down, cut it right back. It's way convenient, especially when you're doing stuff with the middle drag, dragging around, you know, doing your quick edits. You know, it makes things go really fast when you get practiced at doing that. Anyway, I think that's it for now. Thanks a lot.